All right. Well, great. It's 10:30, so we're going to get rolling here. And I want to thank everybody. I'm Scott Landis, President of Infrastructure Resources, and I want to thank everybody for attending today. This is our second Excavation Safety Alliance Town Hall. They're going to be the second Thursday of every month on different topics. And this one topic kind of spun out of our late locates and partnering with 811 centers and one calls last month. So the idea behind the town hall is we've got this awesome group of panel members and moderator who will introduce themselves when we get rolling. And it's really not a presentation. It's a kind of a Q&A session. And the goal is to focus on things that we can do as an industry to move the ball forward. And lots of times people around North America and around the world have great ideas that other people don't know about. So we'd love to get those, and then we publish an article based on this and take all the feedback we get and put it in the DP Pro magazine and on the website. So that's the goal here. So it is a town hall, and fortunately I don't have to do anything else now except turn it over to Dan Bickman, the moderator. So take it away, Dan.
Scott, thank you so much. Look, I just want to say before we start, I really appreciate that Infrastructure Resources is putting together programs like this. I think a lot of us kind of go through our day and go through our work and fight in our own heads about what things should be like and what they were like and how, they should be in the future. And creating platforms like this where you can get people from around the country, from around North America, to sort of participate in a dialogue, I think is really helpful for the industry. So I appreciate you guys, putting these things on. I think they're really helpful for folks. So today, real quick, the sort of topic on the floor is how can SUE, right, subsurface utility engineering and accurate maps be used to reduce damages and costs? I think within that one question, there's a lot of loaded words, and I'm excited to have the folks here sort of help unravel some of that. To give a very quick background about myself, and then I'm going to sort of ask all of our panel members to do the same with one additional question. But my background is I run a company called Bigman Geophysical. We're basically set up to be a support system for the industry, for the subsurface utility engineering and locate industry. And so I think I'm kind of positioned well because I get the benefit of talking to so many different people about this, right? And how should they go about their work? And we get to talk to engineers, we get to talk to contractors and locators, and there's very differing opinions. So I'm going to try to be as balanced as I can possibly be throughout this. And so sort of to turn it over to the panelists, and maybe we'll sort of start with Nick, is give a very brief background about yourself, but then also answer the question, what is SUE?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Background, I've got approximately 40 years in the industry, both in the public and private sector. With the Department of Transportation of Florida for 15 years, and again, the following 30 years in the SUE industry. And okay, the question on SUE, what is SUE? I look at it as a professional practice, number one, that encompasses the three main, what I call professional disciplines: civil engineering, geophysics, and surveying. And it is a practice, to me, that has been developed and proven to be a practice in which we can now, with confidence, be able to collect, identify, and depict the utilities. And it's a practice that's been used, in my opinion, for the past, almost going on 40 years. And it's a means and methods of having good information on our drawings, our highway drawings, or any infrastructure drawings. And it's a practice that's long been overdue, and it's I'm looking forward to the next generation of the practice.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to James. Would you give us a little background about yourself and let us know what SUE means to you?
Sure. Jim Anspach. I'm currently a professor of utility engineering at Iowa State, where we are developing a curriculum for graduate studies in utility engineering. I've been, like Nick, 40 some years in the profession. and as to what Sue is, it's really it's everything Nick said, for sure. And you know, we'll put some extra words in there. It's the thorough attempt to identify and document all utilities, whether you know about them or you don't know about them, within a project limits with a wide variety of geophysics. And when the geophysics isn't getting results, then from available records and visual clues. And the key is, if we do this early and communicate the data and their consequences on safety and schedule and budget to the designers, those designers can make good decisions on avoiding utility conflicts altogether, or if they can't avoid them, accommodating or relocating them. Along with that, of course, comes prudent exposures throughout the project life cycle to identify whether a potential conflict is a real conflict. And this is ASCE 38 in a nutshell, which is our standard on utility investigations.
Great.
One of the issues has always been keeping the data current and creating better records. And so we have a new companion standard, ASCE 75, coming out to complement 38.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm sure we're going to get into that in a bit more detail as it sort of unfolds. But thanks, Jim. All right, I'm gonna move on to Lawrence, who I think is our only international panelist, correct?
Yeah, I'm glad to bring the international spin to this thing. Not too far international, a little bit north of the border, and spent a lot of time down south of the border. But I'm Lawrence Arkansas. I'm the president at Foresight Utility Engineers. I've been doing this for about 20 years now. Had the pleasure to work with a lot of Jim, Nick, and a lot of the other panelists on here. And so right now I'm essentially a provider of subsurface utility engineering, mainly up here in Canada, but do have a lot of experience in my previous employer doing it down south of the border as well. To answer your question, Dan, I think Nick and Jim obviously did a great job, and I agree with their assessment of it. Just to kind of build on that, I guess it definitely is a professional service, and I think the key thing is that you're following that ASC established standard, the ASC 3802, and making sure that you're doing things in accordance with that. To put it kind of in layman's terms, essentially what we're doing is giving that information to designers and putting that cover or the photo on the front of the box of the puzzle, that puzzle being what's underground. Once you have that cover and an accurate photo of what's under there, not only is it valuable for the engineers and designers, which is where Sue kind of starts with, but also that puzzle can then be used for other aspects through construction and all that. And that's where I think that Sue component really fits in well as one of the first steps in damage prevention.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. All right, the next panelist, Barbara, kind of tell us a little brief about yourself and, you know, a brief sort of description to you of what Sue means.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Barb Cedarberg, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer of Gopher State One Call, which is the One Call Center in Minnesota. And I think both Nick and Jim did a great job on describing Sue as a professional practice, professional expertise. And what I see is the foundation of engineering and design projects, but also the generation of high quality maps that data can then be used through the whole excavation process, locating, excavating and such. So it's really the foundation of how do we take safety to the next level.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. And it's very happy to have your sort of perspective too, is from that one call piece, which is clearly a critical part, but you know, is integrative part as well to the whole process. Ron Peterson, you know, a brother of mine. So Ron, go ahead, tell a little bit about your background and what Sue means.
Sure. Again, my name is Ron Peterson. I'm currently the Executive Director of NALCA, which is the Association for Utility Locators. I have a second hat for the purpose of this, in which I'm the claims avoidance provider for the National Utility Contractors Association. So I wear a couple of hats. You know, can't disagree with anything I've heard about Sue so far. From my perspective, whether it's on the NOLCA side, whether it's the locators or on the engineering side, the designators, we're the information providers that ultimately, get that information to the engineers to make these plans work. So, it's vitally important. From my construction side, you give me good maps, good plans, and a good design, I can work more efficiently and not hit things. So it's a safety issue as well. So we're excited about SUE. Obviously, we're wholeheartedly behind it and want to see it moving the right way. We know it works. Been countless studies saying it works. So we need to just keep promoting.
Excellent. Thanks so much. All right, our final panelist, Brenda. Go ahead.
Hi, so I'm Brenda Riggle. I'm the executive director for the NUCA of Pennsylvania, which is National Utility Contractors Association. I've been in the industry for 27 years, fighting for contractors, dealing with the one code law. We managed here in Pennsylvania in 2006 to put the first SUE required language into our law. And I had the privilege of writing that without any experience or knowledge. So forgive me if it's not as well as Colorado's, but it was literally on very short notice, but I did manage to do that. What I see from the contractor's perspective is we see SUE as a way to provide better detailed designs for our bids. We hope that then those detailed designs will help us reduce the downtime, because there's a lot of mismarked and unmarked lines that are out there that we're running across, and that's getting worse. We think that in turn, having that detailed information will improve safety for our crews and for the public. And at the same time, it'll save the project owners money.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. All right, to kind of push this along, then is I'm going to kind of kick it over to everybody with this, because there's this emphasis in sort of all your introductions, about certainly the first 3 or 4 that SUE is a practice, right? It's sort of a professional practice that we're doing, and Brenda kind of touched on this at the very end there, right? For a reason, which is limit downtime. But if it's a practice, is SUE, I guess, let me put it this way, who carries it out? Like, who's responsible for the SUE process? Is it the engineering company? Is it the locate company? Is it the one call company? Is it the professional organizations like NOLCA and NUCA? Is it, who's responsible for carrying it out, and who's responsible for ensuring the level of quality that would be considered, a standard by SUE? And why don't I go ahead and throw it over to Lawrence to start kind of the conversation.
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, the work is done under the auspice in Canada, and I know in the US too, of the professional engineer in charge of it. So usually that's why there are dedicated SUE firms like ourselves. And then the actual, so overseen by an engineer and obviously ultimately signed off, the work itself in terms of the field side is done by those technicians, SUE technicians that are under that responsible charge of that SUE engineer. And I think that's one of the key things, is that the work being done must be overseen and ultimately signed off on by the engineer. And so they must be obviously intimately familiar with what's being done and ultimately responsible for it. And so part of the training, the certification, the knowledge of what's going on there out in the field.
Great. Does anybody have sort of anything to add to that, beyond the engineers?
Sure. When we started this whole journey in 1981, SUE was, we didn't call it that then, but the processes really haven't changed. We worked for contractors, trying to get them to have a more constructible project. And we quickly found out that contractors, of course, have to live with their contract, and utility owners are not a part of that contract. So there was no way for the contractor to get paid for this service or pay for the service. So we started shipping it out to utility owners and saying, hey, wouldn't this be facilities? And they didn't care. So then we went to the owners of projects, the DOTs and the Federal Highway Administration and so on. And we got a lot of traction there. And then eventually the owners said, look, this is really up to our design engineers, and therefore you should be working for them. So I think that the evolution has been who's responsible for providing it. Well, I think to some degree it's run the gamut of everybody who's involved in a project, whether they're party to the contract or not, benefits. The real issue has been figuring out who benefits the most and who is going to be legally responsible for errors or omissions in this process. And the Supreme Court decisions over the years have pretty much made it clear that it's a differing site condition. And therefore it is the engineer and the project owner who are responsible.
Well, then what responsibilities fall on the locators themselves? You know, if the locator is inside of the engineering firm or it's a private company, you know, where does the locator sort of fit into this? And I guess, is there a difference between, because another thing that kind of most folks focused on in the introduction was the design part. And so is there a difference between design and damage prevention? And if there is a difference, should there be a difference?
There definitely is a difference between, and I think it's subtle but very important, and a lot of it alludes to the mindset that you must go through. So for the one thing, when that SUE technician is obviously part of a SUE firm or that engineering doing it, they know that going out there, their responsibility is to go out and find the utilities as accurately as possible using the various geophysical instruments that they're out there, and sort of try to piece together the puzzle of what's happening out there so that they can then ultimately create that drawing that's produced by the engineer and shared with the rest of the design team. The mindset of someone going out there that's doing a pre-construction load is to make sure that they have paint on the ground covering things off so that when drilling or digging or whatever that thing happens to be, someone is being safe. So you're more attuned to putting more paint down than less, just because you're adding an extra level of safety. Whereas from the SUE side, you may spend a lot more time out there trying to figure out exactly where those things are, just because of the nature of what we're trying to produce. And I think we see this most from our perspective anyways. Even you look at it during the hiring and training process. A lot of times it's difficult to take a utility locator who's used to the damage prevention side only and train them to do some of the SUE work, just because there is that that mindset that goes in up front. And they both have obviously extremely important roles, but they come in at different stages and a different role in the game.
I'll add something on.
Yeah, Nick, go ahead.
Saying is that when you look at the fundamental differences between the different types of services, I'll simplify it. The SUE services is a practice intended to be for design integration of its information. And that process is very well outlined now with the American standards that we have out there to how we achieve those levels of reliability, comprehensive information. And while we may use the same geophysics, Jim will know, as he's been excellent at communicating this throughout his and our careers, it's the most applicable geophysics applied that not only to image or collect information on the utility, but to take in consideration the surrounding impacts that the ground may have. And to me, we're doing it for design purposes, which design purposes has a pretty well defined by our client horizontal, vertical, and characteristic requirements. Now, let's go to the locating profession. What was its intent from inception? It is a practice that is to provide markings, information for the purposes of construction. And it's to do it in compliance with the state's requirements for position tolerance, more mainly horizontal position tolerance. So it was always intended to be a practice of before you dig, and you have a defined time period when you've got to do that. And so to
Well,
me,
Nick, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question then, because you make a really good point, right? That it almost sounds like SUE sort of should be happening first, locating sort of happening during the construction phase. Two-part question: is there enough SUE being done now? And number two is, if SUE is being done more often and more comprehensive in the beginning, what would be the effect on the locating piece and damage prevention? And would that, by starting with SUE more often, does that reduce the likelihood of damage? And then I want to sort of push it over to Barb.
I'll keep
who's
my
gonna
part
have, I
simple
think, a
because I
critical
want
question.
Jim
Yeah.
and Lawrence to provide input. Simply, the answer, yes. Are we doing it? Yes. But there needs to be more education and implementation by project owners. One of the notes I did in your first question, where does it start? It starts with the project owner. It starts with the money person, the funding.
Mhm.
So to me, we need more. We need the other market sectors. And second, I think that to your question I've noted down when Barbara, you were talking about your introduction, I think 811 centers, if we do more SUE becomes a feeding source to the centers of information that we have.
Mhm.
And the members will now have more information that says, oh God, my God, this project area, Section Township Range has SUE deliverables. So I yield. That's my answer in regards
Sure.
to your question.
Barb, yeah, can you jump in and sort of give us your take on those two questions?
Barb's on mute.
I'm sorry. So what I'd like to add on to that is, with the ability of the SUE data and the accuracy of that data, how do we close the loop with the utility companies, the facility operators, so they actually update their maps to what has been found? Quite often that can be done and is being done, but we have to make sure that that loop is closed, so that when the locators go out and locate now, they have the most up-to-date information. And so on existing projects, how do we close that loop with the facility operators? To me, that's a really key step. And then second is, how do we tie the one-call ticket and the excavation area to be able to view the facility operators' line data, so that the excavators and the locators can see that data real time and be more efficient when they're locating, and then be safer when they're excavating. So that's the vision we have in Minnesota, is tying all that together and being able to view that more accurate facility operator data.
Excellent. So, well, let me ask both Ron and sort of Brenda this question then, and then I'd love to hear the reactions from the rest of the panelists. Is what role do professional societies play, or should they play, in sort of monitoring or promoting, this level of practice? Obviously, we don't have anyone from the ASCE here, but from like the NOLCA and NUCA, organizations, what do you think their role is? Ron, I'll go to you first. Brenda, I'll go to you second.
Okay, and first, I want to go back to one thing real quick about the locator's role with SUE right now. And just to clarify one point, again, and I'm talking one-call locators. One-call locators are now working again for utilities, and for the purposes pretty well laid out by Nick. The thing that gets missed with this is, in many cases, and I'm not saying all, but when a design ticket is called in to a one-call system, the responses mandated by the utility are, you're not going to go do that, or we'll just provide maps. And oh, by the way, those maps are archaic and not having anything to do with previous SUE design. So, I mean, I remember 30 years ago, we put those paper design tickets, we called them visor tickets, because they weren't going to get done because nobody was going to hit anything, but they missed the point, the utilities did, of the value of getting out there, getting paint on the ground, so that, exact locations could be done, and we could do what was then, kind of the earlier stages of SUE. To your actual question, I think professional societies have a great role in this. From the locator side, we set standards on training to make sure that our people are, hopefully trained, certified, accredited, I guess is the current word for our side of it. But we also need that, coming from the ASCE and the Subsurface Utility Engineering Associations to work hand in hand to put those standards together and really to push this. I mean, from NOLCA's perspective, we love the idea of SUE. We want accurate mapping, accurate designs. So, and again, going back to the NUCA support is a big thing. We benefit when we get good design, when we don't have downtime, don't have those, those headaches and those stops and, those safety issues.
Yeah.
I'll yield to Brenda.
Lawrence, go ahead. You want to make one quick point?
Well, I just want to build something on Barb, and both Barb and Ron made a really good point. And I think that if you look at it, when the locators are out there doing construction, they're given the records from the various utility companies for which they're doing those locates. And so they might have a record of the telephone here or the gas here or everything else, and that certainly helps. But if you think about it, they should be provided with that consolidated SUE drawing, because in the SUE drawing, you have the picture of what's out there. And from that big picture, it makes it much, much easier and much more effective for them to go out and do their job. So I think that that's where that whole thing comes full circle, and you give that information to help those locators do what they need to do, which is a very valuable service.
Yeah, I mean, having been in the field personally, it's much easier to do your job when somebody hands you something that gives you indication of what's already supposed to be there. Right.
Exactly.
The most difficult thing is when you get on site and they say, well, we have no idea about anything that's supposed to be here. And then you try to locate everything that's available. And then they say, well, wait a second, there's a bunch of stuff that was supposed to be here and it's not, and your marks aren't there. And it's like, well, until you actually expose something, it's hard to tell. But having somebody go out and do the due diligence, right, is much, it's very helpful for the folks that are, look, I'm in Georgia, so sweating it out in central Georgia in the middle of the summer, you at least you sweat with a smile on your face if someone gives you a nice drawing before you start.
If I can just weigh in on that, that's part of that is our mission with the utility mapping project we have in Minnesota, is that in the field you could pull up all those maps real time in the excavation area and see everything that's there, do your locating, do your excavation, but it has to be dependent upon high quality data from the facility operators. So that's why I have to hold that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Great. All right, go ahead.
All right.
Brenda,
So
and then I want to make a call on one of the attendees who has a question. So Brenda, go ahead.
All right, so I'll try to do this really quickly. I think professional associations have a huge part in promoting subsurface utility engineering. I took that mantra on to give you a funny story really quick. 20 years ago, my board president was on the Common Ground Alliance when it first got started. He came home with the Purdue study, handed it to me and said, Brenda, put this in your file. 20 years from now, we'll be ready for it. I've been in the industry 27 years, so here we are. We're here, we're ready. NUCA, Pennsylvania kind of took the lead on this. We partnered, and I have to tell you, this is the first time I've seen so many broad associations cooperating together. But we worked with the UESI Pittsburgh chapter, NOLCA, Sioux Association, One Call helped us as well, APWA, and a couple other groups, where we held a virtual Sioux symposium. And I believe that link will eventually be put up on the website for those to go and see the case studies that we did. We kind of showed the when you didn't use Sioux and when you do use Sioux. And I think it really brought it out. Another thing I think is very important to get across is from an association point of view is that the project owners here in Pennsylvania are responsible to have Sioux done if their project's $400,000 or more. Their very first question is, well, who's going to pay for that? So what we did as an association is we approached it's called PennVest, which is your state revolving loan funds that come down from the federal government to fund water and sewer infrastructure. We went to them and we ensured that they would cover those additional expenses upfront in the engineering. That's what associations can do, and reach out. And we're also meeting with legislators and lobbying for more detailed information in our language, similar to what Colorado has. It's up to the associations, all of us, to spread the word. And that's our goal here today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. All right. So, yeah, I'd like to call on Ed Landgraf from Texas, 811. I'm not sure if you guys, Infrastructure Resources, can give him the ability to speak for a second, or if he wants to put his question or comment in the chat.
Ed can go ahead and speak, I believe.
Okay, yeah, Dan.
Thanks for your patience, Ed.
Yeah, can you hear me, Dan?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just have a comment. Totally agree with everything that's said. And, you know, our niche at Texas 811, which I've recently been brought on as Director of Underwater Infrastructure Safety. You know, the Corpus Christi incident and another incident in 2018 where the dredge hit the pipelines. It was a direct result of faulty or inaccurate engineering and survey work. So, you know, we've tried to implement and advise other projects. You know, I think all the SUE components are always there. What we found is the order and owner of who owns the processes within SUE and what that order is. And I would like to see this committee come out with that quote unquote best practice on what was that lays out who's responsible, you know, for SUE and the project and at what stage. So one of the results that we've seen is the project owner during the project engineering and scoping and outline before this goes to bid with the GC has already done the SUE work, has already found the X, Y, and the most difficult thing is the Z of this infrastructure. And then we have already gone out, contacted those utilities or pipeline companies and gotten those crossing agreements or low nose or whatever they require to be done. So that way, when this goes into your bid package for your GC, they have that data already. And so the result has been, number one, a lot more competitive bids. And in the contingency part specifically, that their contingency on the project has actually shrunk. So, so I would like to see some best practice outline, guideline. Maybe that already exists. But I think that, you know, going to those project owners, be it the state, be it the ports, who we deal with a lot, and putting that responsibility on them. And I'll make one last comment. I'm dealing with a situation right now in Iowa where the telecom is not able to mark across a lake in Iowa. You know, and this is an ugly situation. You know, USIC has great locators, but they can't locate on the water. So the dredger's like, well, what do I have to do here? And so it's a very unfortunate situation that the telecom doesn't know how to handle. And I'm always preaching, hey, you know, with the infrastructure build out in the U.S., we've got billions of dollars of ports being widened and deepened and waterways that are going to be crossed with this new infrastructure. So don't forget about that in your damage prevention activities. And I'll close. Thank you for allowing me to make comments.
Yeah,
Dan, can I just say something a little funny to Ed's point real quick? Is he was mentioning underground locates. We just finished doing a big job for mapping underground locates up here, but what we did is waited for the lake to freeze over and bought a snowmobile. I don't know if you can do that everywhere in the U.S., but where you could, it worked out.
Yeah, I don't know about Texas. You know, or us here in the South. It's a great point, though. It's, you know, is that depends where you are will affect what you can do. Ed brought up an important question, and I think Jim's probably the one to go to with this one, which is standards. And, you know, are there standards out there? You know, what are they and what really needs to change going forward for them? And then I want to get to a few of the comments in the chat because there's some really critical ones over here.
Well, standards are very important.
And or best practices, Jim, sorry.
Yeah, standards and best practices and technical reports and all of that. And we have got a wealth of information out there that's been produced over the last 40 years. However, we could always use more as long as they don't compete with what's out now. And one of the biggest problems with the implementation of standards is people try to just use one little piece of it, and these standards were carefully put together to act as a whole. And when you try to pull it apart and just do one little piece of it and not the other, it destroys the integrity of the intent. And so we do have ASCE 38 being revised, so the O2 version will be republished as 3822 on July 25th, 2 months from now. And we think that will have, it's about 5 times as long as the previous version. It has a lot of examples and commentary to help people understand what that standard is. Of course, Nick spent quite a bit of time taking that standard to other countries and getting their take on it. So it really is an international thing now, where the standards are out there. They're revised on a regular basis to keep up with the geophysics and the practice and the survey advances in technology and the 3D modeling and all of that. But yeah, we've got a wealth of information out there. They're very important, and we can use everybody's help on producing more.
So go ahead, Lauren.
I was just going to say, I think just to toot Jim's horn, I think the other one that complements those standards really well is the publication that Jim put together with Paul Scott, the SUE for Municipalities, which does a really good job of kind of a how-to guide for anyone that needs to procure it and use SUE, how they can do that and how they can practically use that standard. I think the only criticism of that document is probably the name of it, because it's really not just for municipalities. It can be used by DOTs and anyone that really wants to procure SUE services. So that's a great one that Jim and Paul pulled together.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If I could go back to Ed's comment and,
Yep.
and answer that a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
we've got a lot of guidance out there on when to start the subsurface utility engineering process. And earlier is always better. And if you can, in fact, EJCDC, which is the Engineer Joint Document Committee that puts together standardized contracts, it's actually a basic service that should be done in the study and report phase of a project. So in the planning stage is when you should start this process of investigating the utilities for the benefit of the designer. So there is guidance out there. It's just a matter of getting project owners to understand it.
Well, all right, let me kind of keep this going a little bit. Ron, I'm going to ask you a question. Obviously, you and I have worked on some of this stuff together, and I think it relates, as far as differences between standards, best practices, and sort of what's the role of training in there, right? I mean, something that we haven't touched on, and obviously Jim, over in Iowa has done quite a bit, and you yourself, Ron. And so what's the role of sort of training and certification and how does that sort of relate back to best practices and implementation of standards?
Well, again, we need, with regard to training and certification or accreditation, whatever you want to call it, OQ, we need to know our people out there with our equipment and our methods know what they're doing. Simply put, we need some verification. My old business partner used to say, I go to get my hair cut, and the gal cutting my hair has to have a license, but I can go out and hire 150 locators and nobody needs a license. So we need ways of verifying that we have people out there doing what they're supposed to do. Training is a huge thing. As you know, Dan, we train quite a bit. We do some together, and it's amazing the people that come in with 20 years of experience that have no earthly idea how to troubleshoot with the equipment they've got. So I think, that's one of the things that NALCA was set about, was setting up, we had a standard for 24 years. Nobody was using it as far as training, so we went into the accreditation business, and I think that again pays dividends. But at the end of the day, we need people well trained to do the job, whether it's using my technology, your technology, or what have you.
So let me push this over to Nick and Lawrence then, is, who's the responsible, because, we talked about Sue and the quality that it should be, and the accuracy that it should be when it's being handed over. And so it's sort of two parts here is, who's responsible for the training? Is it at the sort of corporate level, or is it at the, association level or government level? Like who should be responsible for making sure that the folks out there doing the work are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it right, and there's quality assurances and controls. And then the second piece to that, which somebody brought up a good point in the comments, is, from the standpoint of accuracy then, right, assuming training, is Sue, because the comment was basically that it kind of sounds like Sue is more accurate than an 811 locate, and sort of what's your perspective on that? Does Sue sort of, is it typically more accurate? Is it not more accurate? Where does it fall? And what's sort of the relationship between training and, and accuracy between Sue versus 811?
Sure.
Nick, I'll go to you first.
Yeah. Well, it actually addresses your previous question. What do we need to do to change? And I think what we need to do to change actually addresses the training aspect. We've had 20 years of having a standard in place. So the industry has developed best practices. They've done it respectably within their own respective companies, but complying with ASC 3802. But now, thanks to ASCE, Jim Ansbach, UESI, Lawrence, and UESI chapters, there is now the mechanism in the institution that will be the responsible party that gets the training and certification in the fields that are applying toward ASCE 38. So that to me is critical, and that's a big game changer, because for all these years, Jim can attest to it, and Lawrence, the 40 years of practicing this, the first 20 years we were doing it in the blind. We were just respectively trying to figure out, without a standard, how to apply the concept of Sue. Thanks to Jim and his leadership, we started the ASCE 02 with ASC. So we've had 22 years of lessons learned.
Mm-hmm.
And those lessons learned, the industry, Jim, UESI, they have taken that and started to look at a plan to educate and certify, not just, in my opinion, the Sue professionals and the Sue technicians, but all stakeholders that wish to know more about that standard and how to apply it. So that could mean utility locators. They could partner with NULCA. So I'm just throwing out that. Mm-hmm. So that's my response to the question. As far as accuracy, I think we should yield, in my opinion, and Lawrence, I think you'd yield part of your time. We need to give that to the expert, the geophysical guy that started this all, Jim Ansbach. Let him address that part of accuracy, in my opinion, because I think he's more qualified than, in fact, I know he's more qualified than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence.
And so I guess just to build on what Nick said, I guess the simple answer from a training perspective, ultimately the responsibility lies currently at the company level, because it's a company's responsibility to train their people, because ultimately it's their liability insurance and the engineers who signing its insurance that's up against it. If there's an issue that shows up, I think there's opportunities, much like NUCA, for the industries like the Sue Association and UESI to help establish some of that training and to help set the bar in terms of what should be required. And I know there's been lots of discussions both at the Sue Association and UESI at setting those training standards. And then in terms of the accuracy, yeah, I think Jim's got some good can have some good insight, but ultimately I don't think you can qualify one versus the other, because they're two different things. The accuracy is going to be dependent on the user of the equipment and their familiarity with it. I don't to say which is more accurate, I think, is a little bit of a deceptive question. And
it is based on the requirements of the type of locate versus Sue. Locate's got a state law that you got to comply with as far as accuracy is concerned.
Yeah, and Jim might be elaborate on that.
Well, before we throw it to Jim, I want to just bring Barb in real quick. As someone representing 811, is what does 811 in your area do to sort of make sure, or the competency for folks dealing with those tickets and or whether it's through firms or it's just locate firms, what sort of 811's role responsibility for ensuring quality?
Yeah, as somebody mentioned in the chat, the role of 811 is to communicate, take the request from the excavator to dig, pass that on to the utility companies. The utility companies are responsible for locating. They either locate themselves or hire contract locators. My point earlier was that in Minnesota, we're doing quite a bit of project work outside of our normal responsibilities to really increase the quality of those maps, and then develop a process where the locators and excavators could actually see that data. So that's outside of a typical 811 facility. So we're stepping outside of our normal role to do that work, but 811 centers are a communication vehicle, not a locate.
So somebody brought this up in the chat then, Barb, should there be an equivalent standard like ASCE 38 for routine locates, that are 811 type, tickets?
Well, I think the certification that Ron is talking about is good. There's new technology out there with locators that can take the GPS points and feed it back into the cloud to the facility operators to increase their accuracy of their maps as they do locating. I'm really a proponent of that. As you locate, increase the accuracy of the maps, because we all know that the legacy data is quite often very inaccurate.
And sort of just to piggyback on that, another comment in here kind of asked a question, should locators be state licensed occupations like, electricians, which we're talking safety here, right? And what would be your take on that, Barb?
Well, I think the highest we can have in terms of a quality workforce, we all know there's a lot of turnover in the locator industry. And I think we have to address that issue as well as the certification issue.
Great, thanks. All right, so now sort of passing it on to Jim, and then I want to hear Brenda's opinion as well. Jim, as far as the accuracy is concerned, where does that sort of stand, and how do we improve?
I think it's more a matter of precision and thoroughness than it is accuracy. And let me preface that by saying, until the damage prevention locating industry, driven and paid for by the utility owners, until they allow traffic control of the amount of time necessary to actually do the job, more than one person on a crew, so you can put your equipment where it needs to be in traffic, the ability to find all utilities, whether they're there or not. So the unknown utilities, which are 30–40% of our underground infrastructure, isn't on record anywhere, and that is a constructability issue. Until we solve all of those problems, the utility locating damage prevention industry will always have a problem with that thoroughness and precision. And that's really what subsurface utility engineering was developed for, was to fill those gaps by allowing the time, the safety, the thoroughness, and the precision outside of the control of a single utility owner who only cares about their own active facility. They have no skin in the game for anything else other than their own active facility, whereas the project owner has skin in the game for the entire constructibility of that project, and those are the differences.
And so somebody brings up a good point in the chat. Accurate or not, I don't know. I'm going to ask you guys to sort of weigh in on it. But he talks about if there is a difference, between accuracy, is part of that maybe SUE firms are under different pressure, like you're saying, Jim. Than an 811 locator maybe, who might be overworked, who's running tickets, who's out there, like you said, by himself, who may not be on a crew, and does that have an impact, on quote unquote accuracy? And to sort of piggyback on that, is there a difference between, accuracy when it comes to a lot of SUE firms are really doing the mapping piece as well, and 811 locators are generally not doing the mapping? And does that play a role in what we, or how we view the two different, groups that are out there sort of designating, mapping versus non-mapping?
Yeah, I think the evolution of having the same person who finds the utility and marks it, the designating, and then also has to expose it and find it through an 8-inch
Uh-oh. Looks like the,
mindset early on of knowing I've got to be really precise, or I'm going to be out here digging all day and all night trying to find this utility that I said was there. And I think that mindset, you know, if all the contract locators or the utility owner locators had to expose with an 8-inch by 8-inch hole what they marked on the ground, I bet you they'd start getting really good too.
Yeah.
But I think that, Jim, that's the big difference, is that because with the SU locator has to do that, with damage prevention, you just want to make sure that the guy doesn't dig within this general area, right? And
Yeah.
so that talks to the mindset piece of it.
And here's another big issue.
Different end tasks.
Here's the other big issue. The two services have different business models.
Yes.
The 811 locator has a model that they have to follow to comply with the law, with notification and completing their task. It's driven by a 48-hour or X hour. You got to do what you have to do. SU is driven by a approved, mutually agreed upon project schedule to achieve the results that we need in delivering our SU deliverables. So we're not driven by a deadline of 48 hours. You've got to be out there, get your work done, put your mark and go on to the next job. And that model is creating the challenges for NOCA, because it is creating an environment that says we got time because we got to get out of here and go to the next ticket. So the business model has to be looked at, and that's the differences, in my opinion.
Is part of that also, Nick, as brought up by folks in the chat, is you know, is part of that differences in business model related to, you know, from a locator standpoint, you know, going lowest bid to utility owners, you know, does that affect it versus, you know, a bid process, you know, under an engineering contract where there may be nuance, right, that you'd get in a SU bid versus a ticket from an 811 call? Yeah,
it's a good point. You know, the locating model is driven by, competitive bidding, but they still have a means of how they price their tasks, whether it's in units or whatever. And in our profession, it is a professional services, so we're not seeing the days when it was first started where we had unit prices and we were doing lineal feet per hole, but it is a different means of how we achieved our pricing. What I see is there is some commonality is that, the locators use the tools of the trade.
Mm-hmm.
They train for the tools of the trade, but their practicing is under tight restrictions. They've got to get out there and do it in a very quick time. And by the way, this particular person that's out there has got another 100 tickets that they've got to respond to in the time frame that they need to. And I think the practice is different from each other.
Great. So I want to bring Brenda back in here because
Yep.
someone had an important comment. And I think this kind of relates, you know, to NUCA and what the contractor sort of role is. So they said something sort of being missed, you know, is the infrastructure itself being physically, you know, inserted into the ground, and like, you know, especially for non-metallic and non-conductive utilities, you know, how critical like tracer wires are and proper installation and all that. As sort of a group that represents contractors, what role did they have even prior, right, to sort of the locate process to make sure that installation is correct, and sort of what can we do in order to, you know, promote and educate the contractor themselves about the entire SU process?
oh, that's really, I have been educating my contractors on subsurface utility engineering over and over and over and over. And they're learning that there's more to it than just quality level D and quality level C, which to us is what we get when we're in the construction phase, when we make an 811 call. So in Pennsylvania, a lot of the projects that have been going out for bid that should have had SU used on them, where they said they used SU, they use quality level D and C. Sometimes here and there a little bit of B, but only in particular sections that they thought there was a conflict, instead of using the levels to the maximum that they could have used. Do I think that the one call or that Sue is the ultimate answer for absolutely every line that's out there underground, abandoned lines, for example? No, I don't. But it is a tool that is a better tool, in my opinion, than what we have today at this juncture in our world. And so I think it can be improved. Let's utilize Sue in the projects, but we've got to get project owners to understand quality level D and quality level C is nothing more than just information from a utility that we got through the 811 system. We have to get them to understand that they've got to go to higher levels to give more accuracy so that they don't have to do as many relocates. Think about it, every time a contractor is working out there in the field and he has to stop his work, that's a whole crew sitting, it's a machinery that's sitting, a lot of downtime. He doesn't get paid for. In Pennsylvania, we can't go after that downtime. It's not legal. Our Supreme Court said, nope, can't do it. And so he's sitting there twiddling his thumbs, losing dollars. And it's just like, we could have fixed this if they would have known it in the engineering phase that it was there. They could have redesigned ahead of time. There's businesses that are affected when that relocate happens. There's traffic jams that happen. There's open cuts in the road that we have to put metal plates over because we didn't know that there was something there and we now have to relocate it. There's a lot of ifs in the underground construction industry that we could try to eliminate the maximum amount that we possibly can by using that Sue in the planning and design phase. And that's where we're coming from. Again, I'm not saying it's the end all. It's going to eliminate every locate the mismarked line or unmarked line. It's not going to ever accomplish that. I don't think anybody that works in this industry ever thinks that could happen, but it is a great tool in our toolbox.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's about reducing risk, not eliminating it.
Correct.
Yeah, and I agree, Lawrence. I mean, that's kind of the way that I've always said. I think there's a lot of times a misguided. I mean, somebody who comes from a heavy GPR background, there's a whole lot of misunderstanding around what it actually does, right? And where what you can see and you can't see. And maybe some of that's from the media, right? And Jurassic Park and Bones and CSI and all that. But in reality, it's like, well, is the utility there? And you're like, well, it's a hyperbola, right? Or whatever. But the point is, like, by just going out and doing this stuff, at least what you're doing is you're helping to reduce that risk, which is always a good thing, right? Reducing risk in all forms, I think, is always a really good thing. Well, let me get to this other real quick piece that's on the second half of the of the title of the town hall, which is accurate maps. And I'm going to push to you, Lawrence, on this one, and then maybe sort of go to Jim. Is how do we define accurate maps? Is it a stamped surveyor on it and that's considered accurate? Is it a specific number of tolerance that's accurate? I mean, what do we? Because we've a lot of times said, well, it's handing over this accurate map throughout this conversation. Let's define what that means, because I think there's some confusion about that and who is legally able to produce a map, and should that be restricted or not, and if not, then sort of what qualification needs to be on a map to say it's been done with this level of whether it's GPS accuracy, total station, robot, whatever. What's an accurate map?
Yeah, and I guess there's a couple different things to look at accuracy. One could be related to essentially the completeness of the information, and the other one, the spatial accuracy of it. And I think that's the whole beauty behind the simplicity of using the quality levels associated with the ASC 38 standard, is that when you're looking at it, you're not speaking specifically to accuracy per se, as much as you're explaining to the user of that drawing how that information was ascertained and what steps were followed to put that data on the drawing. So looking at it and as someone that goes through it, so if someone reading the drawing sees quality level D, They don't really know how accurate that quiet level D is, but they know that the person that put that on the drawing had a record and placed it on the drawing as well as they could based on that record information. So you have to take that and say, maybe it's there, maybe it's not there, and you have to make that judgment call. You know that if they put it on at C, you know they saw a surface feature and essentially connected the dots between two known and established surface features. And then B, you know they've done the geophysics and done their steps. And then A is one where you know that they've exposed it and surveyed it within the tolerance acceptable within that ASC 38 standard. So I think the other thing too is that that's kind of from a spatial action, from a completeness as part of the process. And this is where the reporting and all that comes in. It's important to know what records were looked at as part of putting together that whole drawing. So as a supervisor, we may be looking at hundreds of different records from different years, and some from the municipality, some from the right-of-way owner, some from the utility. And we're going through all of those to layer together this picture of what's out there and to create as accurate and complete a drawing as possible. So you're never going to be there, but by following that process and following that ASC and showing those quiet levels, I think that's as close as you can get.
Mm-hmm. Well, so somebody brought up here also, as far as accuracy goes, you know, one of the biggest reasons for damage isn't mislocated, it's unlocated, right? Services. And so kind of, again, back to this, where does this process begin? Does it begin, you know, even before Sue starts? And sort of here's a question, you almost could kind of go through the panel and say, should every utility be buried with a tracer wire? Going through the panel, kind of, you know, start with Brenda and going all the way through, and then getting Barb's perspective on this as well. What do you think, Brenda?
You know, in a contractor's perspective, we will take every tool in the toolbox that we can get. So tracer wires to me is another tool to be put in the toolbox. Yes, we would definitely support that.
Nick?
Conditionally, yes, but bear in mind that there's other means of identifying a utility other than a tracer wire. So look at the different types of proven technologies to apply, and then assess whether having that as a means of re-identifying it or collecting it, is it necessary if the utility is a metallic pipe and it's got, you know, it's got the ability to be detected. So yeah, it's a conditional yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lawrence?
Yeah, it should be easily locatable, not necessarily by tracer wire, but using conventional methods. You should be able to locate it. And I think that's where you'll see language in the new ASC 75 and also in the CSA S250 standard says that as we're putting new utilities in the ground, they should be easily locatable in the future.
Jim?
You're on mute, Jim.
Can't hear you, Jim.
Still on mute.
I'm going to throw it to Barb first while Jim deals with his technical issue.
So again, state laws have different requirements for tracer wires, but Minnesota, after a certain period of time, years ago, they need to be locatable. And so it is a good tool to use.
Okay, Ron?
Absolutely. I like the conditional of Nick. It needs to be locatable, whether that's tracer wire or other usable means. And if you're going to put tracer wire in, put it in a method that can be used efficiently. I don't know how many places I've seen, you know, systems with tracer wire that just the concept of why it works and how our equipment works is evidently lost in the installation. So if you're going to the trouble, put the tracer wire in, put it in so it's useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point. Jim, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go.
Tracer wire is fragile. It will break. It will corrode. It will become ineffective very easily. And so therefore, that is one of the reasons we created ASC 75, which references all locations to the National Geodetic Survey coordinate system when possible, which means that you should be able to walk to within inches of anything that you record and put in the ground. I would say that, studies over the years have asked the question, why are we not requiring utilities that are put in the ground to be accurate? We know where they are in the future. And nobody can answer that question other than the rate commissions who don't want it done for some reason. It's the rate commissions that are causing that problem. But we now have an engineering standard to address it.
Great, thank you. All right, last question for everybody, because we are coming down to the to the wire as it is. And so last sort of quick lightning round is everybody to go through and give one benefit. We focus on a lot of the features of SUE and how it works in the process, but what's one major benefit? We kind of touched on them, but one thing that jumps out to each of you. And I'll start with Barb on this one.
Yeah, two things. We have a good example in Minnesota where SUE is used on a major project and is saving millions of dollars of relocating equipment and underground utilities, as well as saving years of production costs. So those are two examples: cost savings and project timeline shrinkage.
Great, thank you, Lawrence.
I guess simply I'll go back to the whole puzzle analogy. If you give me a box with a puzzle and half the box is scraped off and you can't see what the picture looks like and you expect me to go out and find things, it's difficult. I find SUE is like giving you a nice crystal clear picture on the front of the box of exactly what that puzzle is supposed to look like, which helps the engineer, the locator, the constructor, everyone down the line.
Ron?
Safety. Bottom line, safety. When we do OSHA training, we talk about OSHA regulations are all written in blood. They're there because something bad happened. Let's do something on this end to prevent our SUE regulations and processes from being written in blood. Let's be safe, and that's the number one thing for me.
Thank you, Jim.
I agree with all of that, and I'll add constructability into the mix.
Brenda?
Wow. So I actually have three. Safety, number one, for our crews and the public. We don't need any more houses to blow up with people living in them. Reduction of downtime for contractors would be a huge impact for our industry. And the other thing is for project owners, the cost savings so they can construct more projects.
Nick, we'll finish with you.
Yeah, it's all of the above, and I'm going to take from Jim because it's a new term: precision and thoroughness. To me, the greatest benefit is we're receiving end client stakeholders deliverables that have precision and thoroughness in them. And that's a big benefit that addresses everything from health and risk and economic.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you and gals, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope I've been an okay moderator and help kind of facilitate the flow of this. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Scott from Infrastructure Resources and Excavation Safety Alliance to kind of wrap things up.
Oh, now Scott's on mute.
Well, I wouldn't be causing trouble, that's why. Yeah, thanks, Dan. You did a great job. So did the whole panel, which is awesome. We're just going to point out a couple things. Is that there's tons of great stuff in the chat. So those who are interested, we will post that chat on the Excavation Safety Alliance Town Hall site because we didn't get to everything we want to, and there's really great points in there. The other thing I would mention is kind of the topic of locates. We do have on the Town Hall page the recording from last month about late locates, and so some of you might be interested in that. And then also, if you're on this call, you're probably pretty interested in SUE, and there is a 5-video series on the Excavation Safety Alliance site on SUE, everything you ever wanted to know about SUE that Lawrence and Jim were both great participants in. So anyway, if you want more information, there is plenty there. And as the slide says, if you'd like to subscribe to the DP Pro magazine, you can just go to the website. It's free, and there's tons of other stuff and interviews on the Excavation Safety Alliance site that are free. Don't forget to come where you can talk face to face with people to the Global Excavation Safety Conference in February in Tampa. And with that, just like to thank everybody and have a safe week. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Great job, Dan.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.